The Welsh Government is using satellites to spy on homeowners with big gardens. This comes as it seeks to overhaul council tax. The Telegraph claim that by using satellites, Welsh Labour are targeting families who live in areas with good schools or lower crime rates to hit them with higher council tax bills. These are under plans being drawn up by the Senate. Sir Keir Starmer insisted that Labour will not raise taxes, but he's also said that the Welsh Government is a blueprint for what Labour can do across the United Kingdom. So it begs the question, could Sir Keir Starmer soon be spying on a neighbourhood near you? Now, joining me now is GB News' political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, you've already got the tarpaulin up in your garden, covering it in preparation, haven't you?
If only I had a house sufficiently grand and big to be really affected by this, Darren. But yes, this is what's going on in Labour-run Wales. 1.5 million homes, and the Valuation Office, as part of HMRC, have been tasked with looking at the houses in Wales because they want to review the council tax bans that was last done in Wales about 20 years ago, because they say they want to address property wealth and rebalance the current system. So they're looking at things like the rates of crime, they're looking at things like if you live near a good school, and they're using satellites to see how big the plot of land is, whether you've put an extension on in the last 20 years, etc., etc. So they're looking at you from above, from the sky. Now, of course, the Conservatives have jumped on this and said, aha, look, if Labour get into power in the United Kingdom as a whole, this is what is coming your way. So Michael Gove, the Housing Secretary, has said these Big Brother tactics will punish families with higher bills simply for having good schools or lower crimes. Now, I think it is worth saying that council tax bans in England were currently set with the value of people's properties back in 1991, so nearly a third of a century ago, and a lot of people's houses will have changed since then. And also there is a feeling, certainly in the Treasury, that it benefits people unduly with bigger homes and unduly punishes people sort of at the bottom end of the scale. So the Treasury have suggested to numerous chancellors that it is worth addressing, but David Cameron didn't want to go there. Tony Blair didn't go there because it's politically difficult. So it's happening in Wales, but would Sir Keir Starmer do it in England? They've said they've got no plans to, but they haven't ruled it out either.
Indeed. Catherine Forster there, GB News political correspondent. Thank you as ever. My panel now are still here. Charlie Rowley, former SPAD to Michael Gove, and, of course, Matthew Stadlin, broadcaster. Now, Charlie, I'm wondering, do you think, because Catherine made the point there that actually they haven't been updated, these council tax bans, since 1991. Now, is that before you were put on this planet, Nearly?
I was...
You were here,
I arrived,
for very long.
I arrived a year early.
But surely that begs the question, something needs to change, right? It needs reform, but I don't know whether or not it needs Sir Keir lending an eye from a satellite saying, your garden's looking nice.
Well, just when I thought, the Labour Party couldn't look down on you anymore, they've now actually come up with a policy to make sure that they can do that in practice. It's ridiculous. You are going to be spied on. The idea also that Labour-run Wales is going to be a blueprint for the nation. It has the worst ratings in terms of the NHS right across the country, so that really does need to be addressed. And I think people should be looking long and hard at the Welsh Labour government to make sure that those kind of practices don't come into the UK. But it is a farce. People, you can do it in a different way. You can always try and change the council tax bans. You can do but it is effectively a tax on aspiration and trying to increase taxes on people who have worked hard, saved hard all of their lives to have a decent standard of living, that communities have created good schools, good communities, and they are now going to face a hike in their taxes by what could be an incoming Labour government.
How can you possibly say that this is a tax or would be a tax on aspiration? So much of our wealth in this country is entrenched in our property. if you remember back in 2015, Ed Miliband was talking about a mansion tax, and Vince Cable floated before that the idea of a mansion tax. Now, there are all sorts of problems with that. But as we've just been hearing, the council tax bans haven't been played around with for, what, 33 years? Let me answer your point, because it's an important one. People go out to work and work incredibly hard and get taxed on their income. Surely it is better to tax a little bit more progressively and fairly on property through council tax than it is to tax hard-working people like yourself or Darren. I'll leave myself out of it for the current purposes on your income. The income tax obviously is necessary, but high income tax, you can make a much more persuasive case of being a tax on aspiration rather than taxing a little bit more on property, so that someone in a massive house doesn't pay roughly the same as someone who's in a much smaller property.
But you often find, sorry, just to be honest, you often find people in these big houses, if they are big houses and they are very lucrative because they are assets. These people might be asset rich, but they are cash poor.
That's exactly right.
And that's where the money goes to die, doesn't it? Because you have people whose properties have boomed, sitting on these mountains of cash that are untapped.
But then if you're taxing them again, if you're increasing the taxes on their asset, which is their home, which they're going to pass on to the next generation in terms of inheritance, you're giving people a double whammy. So it is
you'd rather raise, if you want better public services, you'd rather raise income tax.
No,
you're prepared to pay more income tax than you already are.
No, I would like to see increased investment in this country from abroad. That's why we have a brilliant trade secretary. That's why we've got a brilliant trade operation across the UK to make sure that we're getting that inward investment. I'd want to see lower taxes to increase innovation.
Fairer taxes to
turbocharge the economy.
Fairer taxes, that's all fine. I'm very pro-investment and all the rest of it. We're all pro-growth. It's a question of how we get there. But in terms of a tax system, we know that tax has to happen, has to be levied. Surely a more progressive approach is to tap into untapped wealth rather than hammering people who are working 10, 12-hour days to put bread on the table.
But a few things I would say, though. We've already got council tax bans, right? So the people would already argue that bigger houses are paying.
But they're a farce. They're a farce because the difference is I live in a decent-sized house in London, right?
Yeah.
And I pay a negligible amount of council tax. And particularly when you compare what I pay to someone who lives in a much smaller property. Would this affect me? It absolutely would affect me. And when Ed Miliband was talking about a mansion tax, which would have also affected me, not because I live in a mansion, but I live in central London, I still voted Labour because I want to live in a marginally fairer society.
Okay. But you are. I will get you out. You are a hard-working person. You work incredibly hard, and I see that every day when we sort of do these discussions. But you're not necessarily, and you will be impacted. But think about the pensioner that has got this as an asset. They will be hit the hardest.
You can protect them, because it's a really important point that you raised,
You'll be taxing pensioners.
This would be true of a mansion tax,
and
no one's talking about a mansion tax anymore. There are a lot of people think we should be. You can bring in protections so that you absolutely do not have a situation where a GB.
They're saying in Wales.
Let me finish. Where a GB News viewer at home who might be a pensioner is not going to be turfed out of their house because their property went up.
They're going to be
spied on. No fault of their own. They're not going to be turfed out of their house if they can't afford to pay a higher band of council. There'd have to be safeguards in place. Of course there would.
And then you've got the HMRC apparently snooping through your bank account as well. It just feels like we're...
Well, on the spy thing, this is a sensationalist headline from The Telegraph. They're using technology to try and understand how big people's properties are. By the way, I haven't got my tarpaulin up. Some of your comments today, Darren,
yes.
It's as though you're auditioning to be a stand-up comedian. I'm chuckling away in the breaks.